the summer of 1518, a woman named Frau Troffea walked out of her house in Strasbourg and began to dance. She danced for hours, then days. She didn't stop for sleep. She didn't stop for food. When her feet bled, she danced on. When her legs gave out, she got back up and kept dancing. Within a week, 34 people had joined her. Within a month, 400. People were dying of exhaustion, of heart attacks, of strokes, dancing themselves to death in the streets of one of medieval Europe's most prosperous cities. The authorities didn't quarantine them. They didn't arrest them. They built them a stage, hired musicians, and encouraged them to keep dancing, believing that was the cure. This is the dancing plague of 1518, and nothing about it, not the cause, not the cure, not why it happened exactly when it did, has ever been fully explained. Strasbourg in 1518 was a city on the edge. The summer had brought catastrophic crop failures across the Rhine Valley. Famine was spreading through the region. Syphilis, a new and terrifying disease that had arrived in Europe just 2 decades earlier, was decimating populations without warning. The plague had recently swept through. The Catholic Church was being challenged by new theological ideas that would, in just 1 year, become the Protestant Reformation. For ordinary people, the farmers, the laborers, the street vendors of Strasbourg, life had become almost unbearable. The feudal system that was supposed to provide order and protection seemed to be breaking down. God, it seemed to many, had abandoned them. Into this environment of maximum psychological stress came Frau Troffea. We know very little about her. Historical records give us only her name and the fact that she was a local woman who lived in the Strasbourg quarter. What we know is that on a summer day in July 1518, she walked into the street and began to dance. Without music, without apparent reason, without stopping. The dancing was not celebratory. Witnesses described it as frantic, involuntary, and terrifying. Troffea reportedly wept and cried out as she danced. She was not choosing to do this. Something had taken over. Within 4 days, the local physician had recorded 34 cases. The Municipal Council of Strasbourg, among the most organized and literate civic bodies in Europe, was confronted with something no governance manual had ever addressed. What do you do when your citizens can't stop dancing? Their response was extraordinary. Rather than isolate the dancers, the council initially decided that the dancing needed to run its course. They cleared the grain market and the guild hall. They hired professional musicians, drummers, and pipers to provide accompaniment. They brought in acrobats and entertainers. They effectively threw a party for people who were dying. By August, an estimated 400 people were dancing simultaneously in the streets of Strasbourg. Eyewitness accounts describe a scene from a nightmare. People with bloody feet continuing to dance, people collapsing and being carried away, people crying and screaming even as their bodies kept moving. Some accounts claim that up to 15 people per day were dying of exhaustion, heart failure, and stroke. The city finally reversed course. The musicians were dismissed. The dancers were loaded onto carts and transported to a mountain shrine dedicated to Saint Vitus, the patron saint of dancers, where priests performed religious rituals over them. Within a few weeks, the dancing stopped. But no one could explain why it had started, and no one could explain why it stopped. Records of the dancing plague of 1518 exist in city council minutes, physician reports, and church documents, making it one of the most extensively documented mass events of the medieval period. And yet, 5 centuries later, the cause remains genuinely contested. The leading scientific explanation today is mass psychogenic illness, the same phenomenon that explains the Tanganyika laughing epidemic and other cases of collective symptom spread. Proponents of this theory, including historian John Waller, argue that the extreme social stress of Strasbourg in 1518 created the perfect conditions for a psychological contagion. Trofea's dancing may have been a genuine psychosomatic episode, her body expressing through movement what her mind could not process through any other means. A competing theory implicates ergot, a fungus that grows on rye grain in damp, cold conditions. Ergot contains compounds chemically related to LSD that can cause hallucinations, convulsions, and involuntary muscle spasms. Critics of the ergot theory point out that ergotism tends to cause paralysis and loss of sensation, not coordinated dancing. And victims of ergot poisoning don't typically describe their symptoms as dancing. Neither theory is fully satisfying. Neither explains everything. What the standard historical accounts tend to gloss over is the political dimension of what happened in Strasbourg in 1518, and who benefited from it. The city council's initial decision to encourage the dancing with professional musicians has always struck historians as bizarre. Why would rational civic leaders respond to a medical emergency by hiring a band? Some researchers have suggested that the explanation lies in the intersection of religious authority and civic control. In 1518, the Catholic Church's grip on popular belief was beginning to fracture. Luther's 95 Theses were just 1 year away. In this environment, a mass outbreak of apparently supernatural affliction, St. Vitus's curse, was deeply useful to the Church. It confirmed that the supernatural was real, that God's wrath was visible and immediate, that the Church's intercessory role was essential. Some historians have pointed to evidence that religious authorities in Strasbourg actively promoted the St. Vitus narrative, not because they believed it, but because it served their institutional interests. The transportation of the dancers to the shrine of St. Vitus was not merely a medical decision, it was a theological statement. Was the dancing plague spontaneous? Was it a natural crisis exploited by institutions of power? The timing, 1 year before the Reformation, in a city drowning in anxiety, is difficult to ignore. The dancing plague of 1518 is one of the earliest and most extreme documented cases of mass psychogenic illness. What connects it to hundreds of other cases across history is what psychologists call dissociation under extreme social stress. When individuals experience unbearable psychological pressure, grief, fear, powerlessness, and have no legitimate outlet for expressing it, the psyche can find another way out. Symptoms appear that are real, physical, and involuntary, but have no organic cause. In highly suggestible social environments, these symptoms can spread like a virus. This is the most frightening aspect of mass psychogenic illness. It demonstrates that the boundary between psychological and physical reality is far more permeable than we like to think. The dancers of 1518 were not faking. Their bodies were genuinely out of control. Their suffering was real. And yet the cause was, in some sense, inside them all along. In 1518, the contagion spread through direct social contact, through witnessing, through shared belief, through the fabric of a community under pressure. Today, we have social media. The question isn't whether mass psychogenic illness can still happen at scale. The question is, what scale looks like now. The dancing plague of 1518 lasted approximately 2 months. It killed an unknown number of people. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. Frau Trofea, the woman who started it all, disappeared from historical record. We don't know if she survived. We don't know if she ever understood what happened to her. What we do know is this. 500 years later, the conditions that created the dancing plague have not disappeared. Extreme social stress, failing institutions, a population with no legitimate outlet for its fear and grief. The only thing that's changed is the infrastructure through which that stress travels. In 1518, a woman danced alone in a street, and 400 people followed her. Today, a single video, a single story, a single carefully crafted trigger can reach 400 million. What do you think caused the dancing plague of 1518? A supernatural curse? Mass hysteria? Something in the grain? Let me know in the comments, and subscribe to Redacted Files, because history's strangest stories are the ones that tell us the most about right now.